Hello, and welcome to the Stitches and Stories Studio podcast, where we take you from first draft to first reader. I'm your host, Billy Story, and I'm so glad you found us this week. This week, we're going to talk about before you sign anything, what new authors need to know about publishing contracts. Before we begin, I need to give you a legal disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. Nothing in this episode constitutes legal advice. Publishing contracts are legal documents with real financial and creative consequences. If you have specific questions about a contract you've been offered, please consult a qualified attorney or literary lawyer in your area. This episode is educational in nature and is intended to help you ask better questions. It is not a replacement for legal advice or counsel. In publishing news this week, an AI contract clause every author needs to know about right now. So before we get into the main part of the episode, I want to flag something that happened this week because it directly is relevant to everything we're about to discuss, and the timing is almost too perfect. The Authors Guild released a statement this week calling out something that has been quietly happening inside traditional publishing. Editors of publishing houses have been uploading authors' manuscripts into consumer-facing AI tools like ChatGPT without permission and without telling the authors. The Guild statement made it clear that uploading a copyrighted manuscript into an AI system without the author's permission may violate both copyright and the author's right of privacy and puts the author's intellectual property at direct risk. These AI tools use what they're given: your manuscript, your characters, your story, potentially feeding a model without your knowledge or consent. You can find out more about this in the Authors Guild statement, Publishers Weekly, April 2026, publishersweekly.com. Why does this matter for a conversation about contracts? Because this is exactly why AI clause language is now something every author needs to ask about before signing anything. The Authors Guild has been pushing publishers to include an explicit AI consent clause in the standard author contract. Language that specifies whether the publisher is permitted to use AI tools in any part of the editorial or production process, and if so, what safeguards are in place to protect your manuscript from being ingested by public-facing models. Some contracts already include the language permitting AI use in the publisher's regular practice, but as the Guild pointed out, that language doesn't explicitly cover editorial use, and there's a meaningful difference between a publisher using AI to draft marketing email and a publisher feeding your manuscript into ChatGPT to evaluate or edit it. That distinction should be in your contract and in writing. So add this to your list of questions before you sign anything. Does the editorial process involve AI tools? If so, which ones? And what are the data safeguards? The answer or the hesitation in an answer will tell you something important. The norms around AI and publishing contracts are being written now in real time. Being a contract-literate author in 2026 means knowing that this question even exists and that you're asking it. Now, for today's episode, let's imagine someone offered you a contract. Maybe it's a small press. Maybe it's a mid-sized traditional publisher. Or maybe you're knee-deep in querying and you want to know what you're actually hoping for before you actually get there. Here's the truth. A publishing contract is one of the most important documents you will ever sign as an author. At the most first-time authors have no idea what they're agreeing to, not because they're careless, but because nobody taught them, and they're excited that someone wants to publish their work. So today we're going to talk about that. So this episode, we're going to talk about what it means for the first time novelist to understand the industry you're publishing into. As I mentioned before, my name is Millie, and today we're going to do a deep dive into publishing contracts, specifically what you need to understand before you sign one. And I want to be very clear and upfront. I'm not an attorney. Again, this is not legal advice. If you receive an actual contract, please have a publishing attorney or a qualified literary lawyer review it before you sign. What I can do today, though, is help you understand the landscape, to know the vocabulary, and to ask the right questions. And that's what this episode is for. That's what we're going to be covering. So, the rights conversation: print, digital, audio, film, and why each one of these matters separately. Publishing timelines: what's normal? What's a red flag? What can you negotiate in your contract? Royalty structures: how the money actually flows and what the percentages mean in practice. Responsibilities: who does what, from editing to marketing to cover design. Reversion clauses: how to get your rights back if things don't go as planned. You need an out. The small press difference: how contracts from smaller publishers differ from major houses. So, take a sip of coffee, have a nice warm beverage, get comfortable, and let's get into it. Rights: the most important word in your contract. When a publisher offers you a contract, they are not buying your book. Let that sink in for a moment. They are not buying your book. They are licensing the rights to your book, specific rights, and for a specific period of time, and sometimes in specific territories. The book and the underlying copyright remain yours. What you're negotiating is exactly what they're allowed to do with that book and for how long. This distinction matters more than almost anything else in publishing, because rights, once granted, can be extremely hard to get back. Print rights. Print rights are what most people think of when they think of a publishing deal. These cover the physical book, hardcover, trade paperback, mass market paperback. When you grant print rights, you're giving the publisher permission to manufacture and sell physical copies of your work. Questions that you should understand in your contract: are they licensing print rights worldwide, or just in North America, or the country where you are now? Are they required to actually publish a print edition, or can they choose not to? What format are they going to publish? Hardcover, paperback, or both? These details do matter. Digital rights, or ebooks. Digital rights cover electronic versions of your book. Ebooks sold through platforms like Amazon Kindle, Apple Books, Kobo, and others. Many contracts bundle digital rights with the print rights almost automatically these days, as if they're the same thing, but they're not. An author who grants print and digital rights together has given up two separate revenue streams in one decision. The ebook market is substantial and growing. We talked about this in a recent episode. Those rights have real value. Know what you're granting. Now, what of audio rights? Audio is the fastest growing format in publishing right now. Audiobooks grew another 20% in 2025 alone. Audio rights cover the production and distribution of an audio version of your book, narrated, produced, and sold through platforms like Audible, Libro.fm, and others. Here's something important to remember. Audio rights can be licensed separately from print and digital. Many agents and savvy authors specifically carve out audio rights to retain or sell separately, often to audio-specific publishers or to sell directly through ACX or Findaway Voices. If your contract bundles audio with print and digital and assigns royalties at the same general rate, pause on that. That's a red flag. Audio deals can be structured very differently and often more lucratively when handled separately. Subsidiary rights. Beyond those three core formats, print, ebook, and audio, most publishing contracts also address what are called subsidiary rights or subrights. These include things like translation rights, license your book to publishers in other languages in other countries, film and TV, optioning or selling the right to adapt your story for screen, merchandising rights, products based on your book's characters or world, and first serial rights, excerpts published in magazines before the book releases. Some publishers take a percentage of subrights revenue if they help broker the deals. Others want to hold subrights even without any specific plan to exploit them. Be very clear on what subrights you are granting, whether there's an active effort being made to sell them, and what the revenue split is if they do. The general principle is only grant rights to the public grants the publisher can and will actively use. Rights that sit dormant in a contract are rights that you cannot sell yourself. Now let's think about publishing timelines. What's normal? One of the biggest culture shocks for first-time authors entering traditional publishing is the timeline. This industry moves very slowly, intentionally in some ways, but it can be slow in ways that you aren't even thinking about and probably aren't in your best interests. So it's good to know the difference. So what's typical? After a contract is signed, a traditional publishing timeline for a debut author often looks something like this. Developmental editing and revisions, 3 to 6 months. Copy editing and proofreading, 2 to 4 months. Cover design and catalog placement, 2 to 4 months. Advanced reader copy or ARCs, distribution, and review seating, 3 to 4 months before publication date. The publication date is typically 12 to 18 months after a contract signing. 18 months is common. 24 months is not unheard of for books that need a place to be placed strategically or for a particular season. So I think Christmas romance. If someone is telling you that your book will be out in 6 months after signing with a traditional publisher, this is either a very unusual situation or this is a red flag and it's worth exploring more. So what should you be looking for in this contract? Your contract should specify a publication deadline, a date by which the publisher is obligated to actually publish your book. And this matters because without it, your book can sit in queue indefinitely. Publishers sometimes sign books they're excited about, and then they get cold feet, change editorial direction, or face internal restructuring. A contractual publication deadline gives you some recourse. Look for what happens if the deadline is missed. Does that mean you can reclaim the rights if the publisher fails to publish the book within an agreed-upon time frame? Some contracts include this provision, and some don't. If yours doesn't, ask if it can be added. Small presses in particular often have stretched timelines due to smaller staff, and that's not inherently bad. Many small presses do extraordinary work, and it's worth asking directly, what does your production calendar look like for the next 18 months, and where would my book fall? Now, on your side, the manuscript delivery deadlines. The other side of the timeline conversion is your obligation. Your contract will specify when you need to deliver a complete, acceptable manuscript, and acceptable is a term that should be defined. Some contracts specify the manuscript should be satisfactory in form and content to the publisher, which can also be subjective. Understand what standard you're being held to and what happens if revisions are requested. Let's talk money. How does it actually flow? This is a section that often surprises most authors new to traditional publishing. because the numbers that sound good in theory can look very, very different in practice. And this is how royalties are calculated. In traditional publishing, there are typically one of two ways that you can calculate a royalty. The first is as a percentage of the cover price or list price, or as a percentage of net receipts, what the publisher actually receives after the retailer takes their cut. The distinction matters enormously. A 15% royalty on a $20 book sounds like $3 per copy, but if that royalty is calculated on net receipts and the retailer is keeping 40 to 55%, which is common, then your 15% might be calculated on $10 to $12, putting your actual royalty closer to $1.50 or maybe $1.80 per copy. So always ask, is the royalty calculated on list price or the net receipts? And the answer changes everything. Let's talk about royalty ranges. Here are general royalty ranges that you are likely to encounter, though these can vary significantly. On a hardcover, 10 to 15% of list price is considered standard at major publishing houses. Trade paperbacks, 7 to 10% of list price. Mass market paperback, 6 to 8% off of list price. Ebook royalties at major publishing houses are 25% of net receipts, which the Author Guild has argued for years that it is too low. Audio royalties vary considerably, anywhere from 10 to 25% of net, depending on the deal structure. And then small press royalties are often structured differently, sometimes higher percentages, but on lower net receipts. Small presses offer a higher royalty percentage than major houses, which can sound appealing. But if their print run is smaller and their distribution is more limited, then their net receipts per unit are lower, and the actual dollar amount per sale may be similar or less. So it's good to look at the full picture and not just at the percentage. Advances and earning out. Most traditional publishing deals include an advance, a sum of money paid to the author before publication, and it's paid against future royalties. The advance isn't a bonus, it's a prepayment. You won't receive additional royalty income until your book has earned out, meaning the royalties your book generates equal the advance that you've already been paid. Many books never earn out their advances. That's more common than the industry likes to advertise. If a book doesn't earn out, the author doesn't return the advance. That's not how it works. But they also don't see any additional royalty income. Understanding earn-out expectations before you sign helps you calibrate what success looks like for you in this deal. And what about the royalty reporting? So let's say your book earns out and you're starting to collect royalties. Ask how often royalty statements are issued. Is it twice a year? That's standard at traditional publishers. Some smaller presses offer quarterly statements. Ask when payments are sent, or after the statements are sent out. So sometimes there's a 60 to 90-day lag. And ask whether you can audit the royalty statements if you ever have questions about the accuracy of the numbers. Most contracts do allow for this, and there should be a clause in there for it. Now, what are responsibilities? Who does what? One of the most practical conversations to have before signing any publishing contract, traditional or small press, is about the responsibilities. Not just what you're legally agreeing to, but what can you actually expect from the terms of the editorial support, production, and marketing. With regard to editorial responsibilities, in the traditional publishing deal, the expectation is that the publisher provides editorial support, a developmental editor, or acquiring an editor to work with you on the manuscript, a copy editor, and a proofreader. And these are real services with real value. But what a contract often doesn't specify is how much editorial attention you'll actually receive. Some editors work closely and collaboratively with the authors. but others are overextended and provide minimal feedback. So it's reasonable to ask during the negotiation phase who specifically will be editing your book and what does that process typically look like. With small presses, editorial depths vary widely. Some are staffed by passionate, experienced editors who punch above their weight. Others offer minimal editorial support. So ask specifically what their process looks like as well. And if the answer is vague, that's some clear information. Let's talk covers, because we all know every book is judged by its cover. At traditional publishers, you typically don't have control over your cover. The publisher owns that decision. Authors can request input, express preferences, and flag concerns, and a good editor will advocate for you internally, but the final call usually belongs to the publisher's design and marketing teams. At small presses, this can vary. Some authors have more input or approval rights over the cover design. If cover creative control matters to you, ask explicitly whether you have approval rights or approval on consultation, and get whatever is agreed to in writing, because formal promises will not survive if there's an editorial team change. And what about marketing? This is a conversation that surprises and sometimes disappoints many debut authors. Traditional publishers do provide some marketing support, particularly for books they're investing heavily in. But even at major houses, authors are expected to actively participate in their own marketing, maintaining social media presence, building their newsletter, doing interviews and appearances, pursuing blurbs, engaging with bookstores and libraries. What the publisher will typically provide is some publicity support. A publicist for a period of time may work with you around the launch, catalog placement, and distribution relationships. But what they don't often provide is sustained long-term marketing investment once the launch window closes. At small presses, marketing resources are often limited. The author frequently carries more of the marketing weight. This isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but it should be clear-eyed expectation before you begin. Ask your potential publisher, what does your marketing plan look like for this book? What's the print run? What's the publicity budget? What appearances or campaigns are you planning? The answers will tell you a great deal about how seriously they're planning on investing in your success. The reversions clause. How to get your rights back. This is a clause that most first-time authors don't think about when they're excited about an offer, and the one they wish they had understood better years later. And I have had this situation myself. A reversions clause specifies the conditions under which the rights you've licensed to the publisher revert back to you. In other words, when does your book come home? What triggers a reversion? Traditionally, reversions are triggered when a book went out of print, when they are no longer available in physical copies. The standard made sense back before ebooks, but now a publisher can keep your book technically in print by maintaining a digital edition with minimal sales and essentially zero marketing. And that's indefinite. This has become one of the most contentious issues in modern publishing contracts, so it's one to pay attention to. Better reversion language ties the out-of-print trigger to actual sales thresholds. Something like, if net sales fall below X number of copies per royalty period, the book is considered out of print and rights revert back to the author. Ask specifically how out of print is defined in your contract. If it's purely about availability rather than sales, you want to push back on that. Most contracts require you to request the reversions in writing and give the publisher a specific window, often 60 to 90 days, to put the book back into active distribution before reversions take effect. Understand this process so you know your options if you want to pursue them. If your book doesn't perform the way everyone hoped that it would, which can happen, and it's not a reflection of your worth as a writer, a strong reversion clause means you can reclaim your rights and pursue other options. such as a different publisher or self-publishing, maybe in other markets like translation markets. A weak reversion clause means your book can be locked up for the length of the copyright, which is effectively forever, as in the United States, copyright expires 70 years after the author has died. So protect your future self and read the reversions clause very carefully. So let's tie this all together. Signing a publishing contract is exciting, and it should be. It represents real validation and a real opportunity for your hard work. But it's also a legal agreement with long-term consequences for your creative work and your income. Going in informed is not cynical, it's professional. Here's the short version of everything we've covered today. Know your rights, specifically what you're granting, in what formats, in what territories, and for how long. Rights have real value. Be intentional about which ones you're licensing. Understand your timeline. When is the publisher obligated to publish? What happens if they don't? And what are your delivery obligations? Know your royalties and how they're calculated. List price versus net receipts is not a minor distinction, so make sure you ask questions. Clarify responsibilities, editorial depth, cover input, marketing expectations. Get specifics, not promises. Read the reversions clause. Know how out of print is defined and how you can reclaim your rights if you need to. And one more time, because I really mean it, if you receive an actual offer with the contract attached, please have a publishing attorney or literary lawyer review it before you sign. The Authors Guild has a list of recommended publishing attorneys. Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts offers resources in many regions. The investment is a single hour of legal consultation and is worth far more than the alternative. You've worked hard on your book, too hard to sign away more than you intend to. Know what you're agreeing to. Ask questions. Find your people. And that includes the right legal counsel when it's the right time. And that's what we're trying to build here, one episode at a time. So I hope this episode has helped you. I'm going to have some links in the show notes. And if you'd like to support me and this podcast, you can do so at Substack. Just look for Melissa L. Story, or over at buymeacupofcoffee.com, also under Melissa L. Story. And if you'd like to know more about my books, you can find me at stitchesandstories.com. And keep writing. I'll see you next week.